Okay, folks, um, today's tutorial is about insect gas exchange, and with all the gas exchange systems that you need to learn about for A-level biology, you've always got to relate them to Fick's law and always think about how the gas exchange system maximises surface area, how it maximises concentration gradient, and how it minimises the diffusion pathway. So we're going to try to address those questions in this little mini tutorial. So I'm going to draw a picture of an insect, a diagram, let's say. So the head, the thorax, I'm leaving some little gaps on the top, which will make sense in a minute, and then the abdomen. And actually these little gaps here, they occur over the surface of the whole insect's body. Yeah, so let's just give a little bit of context. This is the head, that's the other end. These gaps, they're called spiracles. And for your exam, you will need to know what the spiracles are for, and the fact that they open and they also close. They have the ability to open and close at different times of the day, and we'll talk about that in a second. Okay, so these little gaps on the surface of the insect's body open up into little tubes, and the tubes are, I suppose, they're equivalent to our bronchi and bronchioles. And they subdivide in the same way that the bronchi and the bronchioles do, and they get smaller and smaller, and they basically go throughout the whole insect's body. Okay, so if I'm just going to draw in a couple of examples to show you that they're getting smaller and smaller, and then at the end of each tracheole, so there are these all over the insect's body. Remember, they don't have blood in the same way that we do, so they have to transport their gases through these little airways to every cell of the body. So at the end here, I'm going to draw in some cells of the insect's body to show that any oxygen that comes in through the tracheole from the atmosphere will be able to go all the way down the tracheal system, and then it will be able to diffuse into the cell. I'm going to draw a little enlargement of this now. Okay, so let's have an enlargement of one tracheole next to one cell. So it's important to say that each tracheole is really, really close to a cell, and every single cell has a tracheole really close to it. So here's a cell. Here's the end of that tracheole, and what happens is the oxygen will diffuse from the atmosphere all the way down this tracheole. So there it goes, and then it will be able to diffuse into the cell. And then once inside the cell, the oxygen gets used for respiration. Let's write that down. Is used for respiration. And so what you have is you have always a lower concentration of oxygen inside the cell, and always a higher concentration of oxygen outside the cell on the tracheal side. So you will always have a concentration gradient, so that the oxygen will diffuse from the tracheal into the cell in the right direction. So let's write that down. Always less oxygen in cell than in tracheole. So there is a concentration gradient. Okay, so we can actually look down at our list down here. That's number 2. a large concentration gradient is achieved at the exchange surface. And one thing that we can say is that that's because that's achieved by the oxygen inside the cell being used up. And of course, fresh oxygen coming into the tracheal. So we can draw a little arrow up to here. The other thing that's happening, of course, is that as respiration happens, carbon dioxide is being produced. And there's going to be more carbon dioxide inside the cell than there is outside. And so it will tend to diffuse out in the right direction and eventually diffuse out into the atmosphere, which is exactly what is needed. Okay, so let's have a look at this little list again. Let's have a think about surface area. So the exchange surface has a large surface area. This is the exchange surface, the tracheal ends and the cells. That's where the gases are being exchanged. The oxygen is going in, the carbon dioxide is going out. And so we have many of these tiny branching tracheals accessing all the cells of the body. So we can just write down many small branching tracheals. Okay, and then that brings me on to the final thing. The small diffusion pathway is achieved by, of course, the cells are right next to the ends of the tracheals. Write that down. And of course, you could also say something about the tracheal, the walls of the tracheals being very, very thin, probably made up of a single layer of cells. That's a really good thing to have as well. Okay, so I said I was going to say something about the spiracles. The spiracles open to allow gas exchange, and they close because, of course, one of the things that's given off during respiration, let's just have a look at respiration, remind ourselves it's oxygen and glucose, and that gives off some carbon dioxide and some water. And what can happen is that the water turns into water vapour. So let's imagine that's happening here. The water vapour can then escape from the cell where it's in a high concentration, and it can enter the tracheals, and it can actually diffuse out of the insect's body. So the tracheals have to have some way of limiting how much water is lost from them. So the way that they do that is the spiracles can close. Yeah. Okay, to minimise water loss. Great. Okay, and the final thing to add about the large concentration gradient, as well as the oxygen being used up and the carbon dioxide being produced, is that in larger insects, this structure here, the abdomen, can actually move up and down, and that means that it can, in a way, ventilate, pull in new air and get rid of old air. So the insects are not breathing, but they can change the air inside the tracheal system by pumping their abdomens. So we can write down abdominal pumping. So it's just the movement of the abdomen to ventilate the tracheal system. Okay, so that's a whirlwind tour, the kind of thing that I might have done on the whiteboard in the lesson. So use this to help you to fill in the research task that you've completed, and save it in your file somewhere. Okay.